few weeks ago on Flashback Friday, I did a video about the Action Man Moonraker figure set. And in that video, I gave a potted history of the Action Man brand up until the 1990s, which was the era I grew up in and the all-new relaunched Action Man from Hasbro. And in that video, I talked about how growing up in the 90s, Action Man was absolutely ubiquitous. It was everywhere, and it was a toy that all the boys in my class wanted. And over time, I was lucky enough to build my own collection of Action Man figures, vehicles, and playsets. So I thought today it'd be fun to delve back into my Action Man collection and have a look at the Street Racer. So to start off with, by looking at the packaging, this is a big box. That's the first thing to point out. This is pretty sizable, quite a chunky bit of packaging here, and it is thankfully really nicely illustrated. Again, it has that very painterly style, and I love that. I love that kind of illustration on my toy artwork. I think it's fantastic. So this looks really exciting, very action-packed. We obviously have the car up front and centre here, and we can see some of the missiles being fired from the back of the car, and it looks really fun and exciting. Definitely brings to mind images of James Bond. And funnily enough, the price sticker has been left on the packaging here, so obviously this was bought for me as a present when I was a kid, and yet they never took the price off. I've got to say, I've never noticed it until now, after all these years digging it out again, that this was left on there. But kind of cool to see. It's a time capsule to see that was obviously £28, which would be, what, in today's money, probably closer to maybe £50, £60, something like that. So yeah, pretty interesting. And what's really cool is we can see that this actually was part of an exclusive to Woolworths, and anyone who isn't familiar with Woolworths, this was a fantastic general shop back in the 90s that I loved. It had a fantastic toy aisle and had all the best toys, so very sad when that went into administration a few years ago, but yeah, lovely to see this again. And you can see that it actually does come with a free figure, and I will be looking at that towards the end of the video. Meanwhile, on the reverse of the packaging, they've opted for a photo of the car itself, and they've created this pretty fantastic diorama in the background, which I think is really, really good. This is a sort of beaten up street scene, which is a very different tone to the front of the box, but I think it works really well. Although, why Action Man would be driving through this part of town in this very fancy sports car, I don't know, but I guess he's looking for trouble. And amongst the various squares, highlights and features of this car, there is one dedicated to the other figures that you could buy as part of this wave of Action Man figures. And although none of them really fit together in terms of tone, they do a really fantastic job of making these sets look really exciting. Now, the car itself is largely one piece, so it doesn't really require much assembly except for the wing mirrors and the windscreen. And as you can see, this is a fairly chunky vehicle. The overall sculpting is very nice. It does look like a sports car. It does look very flashy. And as I said, it's got more than a hint of James Bond about it, which I think is really nice and very appropriate. And all in all, this looks very nice. I particularly like the fender on the back of the vehicle. I think they've done a really good job with this. And all in all, looks pretty fun. Now, there's not an awful lot of detail on this car, but what is there is pretty nicely done. The tyres in particular are a hard plastic, but they're very nicely designed. We have that tyre effect, which are big chunky tyres actually, which is well done. And the inner hub is quite nice as well. It's got a nice shape to it, and it is concave, so it has a texture, a depth to it, which is pretty cool. Meanwhile, the front of the car, indeed, most of the edges are very smooth curves, and this is nicely rendered. The one shame about this is that all the details in terms of lights are done with stickers, so it makes it feel a little bit cheap. It would have been nice if these had been sculpted and painted in. That would have been fantastic. And it's a real shame that where there's those grooves there, they could have put a grate on there. That would have looked a lot better, a lot more detail, and it would have been a bit more visually interesting, especially if it had been painted, say, grey or something like that, just to give it a little bit more texture. As it is, it just feels a little bit bland, a little bit missing something. Meanwhile, they've done a pretty nice job of the interior of the vehicle in terms of the stickers they've provided to recreate the dashboard. I quite like these stickers. I think there's a lot of detail, a lot of colour on them, which is good. And again, I would have preferred, obviously, to have been sculpted in, but nevertheless, I think this is pretty apt. This works pretty well. And it's nice to see that he does actually have a sat-nav built into the car, which would have been pretty cool and exciting and a bit space age, a bit spy technology back in the early 90s. And interestingly, again, for the wing mirrors, they've decided to opt to use a sticker, so you've got that permanent look where I guess he's in the desert, I suppose, which obviously isn't going to be appropriate for all forms of play, depending on where you're storing the vehicle. And I think it's a shame, really, because they've missed an opportunity to do something kind of cool. If they just used some mirror-type paper to stick onto the wing mirror, it actually could have reflected what was genuinely behind the car, and that would have added an extra dimension to the play, which would have been kind of cool. Now, the interior of the car itself is pretty basic. There's not really so much a seat as there is a slightly raised floor, which Action Man has to sit on, which doesn't look comfortable, I've got to say, which is a real shame, but I suppose he wants to maximise space. And as you can see, the gear stick here is just firmly locked in place, so sadly there's no movement there, which again, a missed opportunity. Would have been kind of cool to just be able to have it wobble from side to side if it had been on a ball joint, say. But before we go any further looking at the vehicle, I did mention my version came with a free exclusive Action Man figure, so let's take a quick look at him. Now, this is one of the later sculpts that they used for Action Man. As you can see, he has the hard hair, he doesn't have the fairy hair that a lot of the earlier versions did, and he has more than a passing resemblance to Pierce Brosnan, in my opinion. So much so, in fact, they would release a series of Action Man James Bond figures tied in to the Pierce Brosnan films. I think they did The World Is Not Enough, GoldenEye, maybe a couple of others as well. But there's definitely a sense this is more of a budget release Action Man, because he doesn't have quite as much articulation. He does have a swivel at the head, but he doesn't have that ball joint anymore, which is a shame. His arms only have a swivel at the shoulder. There is no elbow articulation, and there's no way to move that arm. It is just one solid rubber piece, unfortunately. And even his wrists cannot move, so they are moulded into one position. Thankfully, he's still got the hinged hips though, so he can kick his legs out to the side. He can kick them all the way forwards and all the way back, which is pretty good. But these are rubber bendy legs, so there is a wire in them, and you can just about bend the knee and lock them in place there, but that's as far as it's going to go, really. And then, of course, he has the flipper feet, so there's virtually no articulation, and he's just a lump of rubber. But he does have these very cool jeans, and he does come with this quite nicely sculpted knife, which I think has been recycled several times in the Action Man line. But it's quite cool that it actually straps into his jean pocket there. I think that's kind of fun. And then, of course, we can bend our Action Man into the seated position and put him into the vehicle. Now, the vehicle also comes with a pretty hard plastic seatbelt, which does clip into place to hold him in there, which is pretty good. And you'll notice that the steering wheel does actually move as well. I know it's a very little thing, but it's kind of cool. I'm kind of glad they did this. And of course, as you would expect, the vehicle does roll forwards and backwards. Now, there's no steering, sadly. The wheels do not turn to the side, left or right, but they just go forwards and backwards. But yeah, this is pretty good. Now, bizarrely for Action Man, there is only one action feature on this vehicle, and that is when you press down on the boot of the car, it will flip up to reveal the interior engine and a row of missiles. Now, the engine takes up the majority of the boot space, which is a shame. I think it's nicely sculpted, but the paint apps are a little bit bland. It feels like they could have done a lot more with this. But it's the 4 missiles that are the star of the show, and there's this little sliding mechanism at the bottom of the hood here that when you slide that across, fires out each of these missiles. And of course, they are spring-loaded, so when they go at quite a pace. And they cover a pretty good distance as well. So these things are pretty strong, so they're definitely something to keep an eye out for, or, you know, maybe not, because you don't want to poke your eye out. And that's it, that's your lot. There are no other action features to this vehicle, which is very surprising considering it's Action Man, and I think there's definitely a lot of missed opportunities on here to do something really fun and interesting. Maybe they could have done something around the wheels, maybe had some spikes stick out or something like that. I don't know. I think there's other things they could have done. Revealed hidden missile launchers or something somewhere in the bonnet, perhaps. I don't know. But it feels like there's an awful lot of vehicle here that isn't really being utilised and made the most of, so yeah, I think they could have done more. But all in all, it's still a very fun vehicle. It certainly looks fantastic, and it was a lot of fun to play with when I was a kid. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.